For as long as I've been a gamer, I have felt drawn in by point-and-click adventure games. The unique hand-drawn art was often the main hook for my young mind, as it more closely resembled the cartoons or movies I was watching at the time. And of course, one of the most common fantasies I had was to be able to somehow participate in those worlds or stories. Adventure games promised a more immersive and meaningful version of this fantasy than other genres of the time. They boasted more fleshed out, believable worlds with deeper stories and overall better writing. The idea of an interactive movie or cartoon may be met with some cynicism in today's world, but I honestly think that's just a byproduct of technological progress, and it just shows how far the bar for quality has been raised. Back in the early 90s, developers had to make much tougher choices between focusing on interactivity and mechanics on one hand, or immersion and world building on the other. If a title wanted to have solid gameplay, it usually had to conform to the very specific limitations of a particular genre. The graphics had to be relatively lower fidelity in order to support the particular gameplay loop. We didn't have photorealistic real-time 3D environments, we didn't have physics engines or modular systems that allow for a great wealth of emergent gameplay options. What we had were a few clear-cut base templates, and many games of the era were essentially reskins of the same experience. We all know of the many Nintendo movie license games that were all platformers, no matter what the source material was. There wasn't much room for creativity in the base mechanics, much less in their connection to the world or story. Even when these games had decent stories, they were not merged in any meaningful way with the mechanics. There was nothing unique in your way of thinking or interacting with the game world. Whether you were Luke Skywalker from Star Wars or Bart Simpson, you essentially had the same thought process and performed the same actions. Run forward, jump from platform to platform, and occasionally hit enemies as the level scrolls forward. Point-and-click adventure games were an answer to this limitation. They were a sincere, wholehearted attempt at truly making you feel part of a story. They had better-looking graphics, but were often very static due to technical limitations. However, what they lacked in dynamism, they made up for in depth, charm, humor, and above all else, unrestrained creativity and imagination. This last quality was, in my opinion, a double-edged sword that made some titles into timeless classics and others into sanity-draining chores. Naturally, most fell somewhere in between. Today we will take a look at a game that many consider to be a classic of the genre, and I will give you my opinion on where I think it falls on that scale and why. Beneath a Steel Sky was released in 1994, and it was developed by Revolution Software, who would later also give us the famous Broken Sword series. Beneath a Steel Sky, from now on referred to as BASS, has a very appealing and fitting art style, quite similar to that of a comic book or graphic novel. While the graphics show their age in their low resolution and blocky pixels, they have nevertheless aged quite well and retain much of their original charm. The game takes place in an Orwellian cyberpunk future, and the hand-drawn locations create this consistent, immersive sense of place. Each of the major locations you visit has a distinct color palette and mood, which is in line with the lore of this fictional society and its many layers. The characters are extremely low res even when compared to the rest of the game, but they have nevertheless distinctly recognizable features and personality traits. Further contributing to the world building is the writing. You learn a lot about this dystopian future through dialogue, computer terminals, and often through the puzzles themselves. Many characters deliver bits of flavor text that are not only consistent with the way the world works, but can also serve as hints on how to progress. It is this intangible, undefined, but consistent link between lore and gameplay that is quite unique to adventure games and is executed particularly well in BASS. The puzzles themselves are largely fun to figure out and generally consistent with the logic of the world. The game strikes a nice balance between creativity and common sense, which to me was a great relief. The control scheme is also relatively simple, relying entirely on your two mouse buttons. Left-click to inspect items, and right-click to interact. This is a far more streamlined design than the extensive and often redundant verb lists of other point-and-click adventures. There also aren't any insanely complicated item combinations or super contrived solutions to most puzzles. I loved how the information/security terminals were a fun way to dig deeper into the story, while also being integrated with some puzzle solving. I feel similarly about the cyberspace puzzles. They are very creative and mostly logical. However, they can occasionally be frustrating because of the precise timing required to solve certain parts. Timing-based puzzles aren't exclusive to the cyberspace sections, and while most of them were fine, there were a few times I encountered a problem. This is the fact that the base game speed is quite slow, and if you decide to adjust it in the menu, it will make the margin for error extremely small, and in some cases I suspect some puzzles will become impossible to solve. Another issue I had with the gameplay was that certain critical items were literally a couple of pixels in size, making it quite likely you will miss them without a guide. Aside from those two issues, however, I will say again that Bass manages to be largely fun and ingenious without crossing over into the ridiculous. The characters are, by and large, very well written, especially your cybernetic companion, Joey.
Foster! Help! Better make my next body move faster, Foster!
Who, throughout the course of the journey, will end up inhabiting a variety of mechanical bodies and serving as your partner in crime, so to speak. He assists you in a number of hilariously mischievous ways and is one of the funniest, most original video game sidekicks I can remember. Your main character also has a pretty compelling, mysterious backstory that you will slowly uncover throughout the game. The overall writing has this interesting tonal mix, being sometimes dark and horrific, but oftentimes absurd and zany. It's a pretty compelling sci-fi mystery, but then it's also a straight-up feel-good experience, giving genuinely cheerful, optimistic vibes. I know on paper this doesn't sound cohesive, but I actually enjoyed it a lot, and I think the game managed to blend these various elements into a unique and memorable experience. Quite frankly, I think a good story in any medium should take you through a variety of emotions, and I think some modern video games have become a tad too obsessed with being a one-note statement or a sort of monotone mood piece. Bass is a lot more relaxed and playful with its own aliveness and confusion, and I personally found that quite refreshing and joyous. I also think a lot of modern video game stories have lost the art of giving the player closure. Without spoiling much, I really felt genuinely very happy with the ending of Bass. Your questions are answered, wrongs are righted, the crisis is averted, and there's a hopeful, happily ever after sort of vibe or message that just strangely fits this dystopian society. I don't think I've had that with any modern video game in recent memory. There's always been something left purposefully unfinished or unanswered, or maybe there's some cynical sense that your actions didn't amount to much, and then there's the ever more popular Souls-like ambiguity and openness to interpretation that frankly often misses the point of its original inspiration. Beneath the Steel Sky has a good story in the old-school, proper sense of the word, and it presents it with unique style and flair, keeping you interested until the very end. If you are looking for a more relaxed, cozy gaming experience, I cannot recommend Beneath the Steel Sky enough. It is free on GOG.com, and the game runs well on modern hardware thanks to the ScumVM engine. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.